So, this series is known as Abortion is Wrong, right? And in order to combat a lot of arguments that people are pro choice, they'll tell you their major argument is that the fetus is not alive, right? So, in order to combat that effectively, we have to know what is life and what's the definition of life on a science and a biological sense, right? So this article is from Khan Academy, right? It says, "What is life? Learn about the basic properties of life as well as ongoing debates about the definition of life." Introduction, right? In the intro to biology video, we define biology as a branch of science concerned with the study of living things or organisms. That definition is pretty straightforward. However, it opens the door to more difficult and more interesting questions. What is life? What does it mean to be alive? Are you alive? It says you are alive, and so am I. The dog I can hear barking is alive, and so is the tree outside my window. However, snow falling from the clouds is not alive. The computer you're using to read this article is not alive, and neither is a chair or table. The parts of a chair that are made of wood were once alive, but aren't any longer. If you were to burn the wood in a fire, the fire would not be alive either. What what is it that defines life? How can we tell that one thing is alive and another is not? Most people have intuitive understanding of what it means for something to be alive. However, it's surprisingly hard to come up with a precise definition of life. Because of this, many definitions of life are operational definitions. They allow us to separate living things from non-living ones, but they don't actually pinpoint what life is. To make this separation, we must come up with a list of properties that are, as a group, uniquely characteristic of living organisms. Right? So, I will prove with this properties of life that the fetus is alive and therefore it is a living thing. Right? It says properties of life. Biologists have identified various traits common to all the living organisms we know of. Although non-living things may show some of these characteristic traits, only living things show all of them. So that means all living things have all of these things, that all these properties that's going to be listed, right? The first one is organization, right? Living things are highly organized, meaning they contain specialized coordinated parts. All living organisms are made up of one or more cells, which are considered the fundamental units of life, right? Automatically that smashes the argument, right? That smashes the whole abortion argument. One, the sperm is a cell, right? And the ovaries is a cell. It says all living organisms are made up of one or more cells, which are considered the fundamental units of life. We have two cells coming together to create a baby, right? So that smashes that whole argument right there. So that means babies or fetuses inside the mother's womb is highly organized, right? Even unicellular organisms are complex. Inside each cell, atoms make up molecules, which make up cell organelles and structures. In multicellular organisms, similar cells form tissues. Tissue in turn collaborate to create organs, body structures with distinct functions. And this is exactly what the fetus is doing. These organisms are creating tissues. The baby do have tissues. We have tissues, right? And then the tissue in turn collaborate to create organs. We already see the fetus is developing, within a certain time, they're going to develop a heart, lungs, a brain. They're going to develop all these organs so that way the fetus can be alive. You see, organs work together to form organ systems. You see? We have the respiratory system. We have the cardiovascular system. We have a lot of different systems in our bodies that is formed inside the mother's womb. You see? Multicellular organisms, such as humans, are made up of many cells. The cells in multicellular organisms may be specialized to do different jobs and are organized into tissues, such as connective tissues, epithelial tissue, muscle, and nervous tissue. Tissues make up organs, such as the heart or lungs, you see, which carry out specific functions needed by the organism as a whole. Humans are multicellular organisms, like this it says, right? Now, metabolism. 2. Life depends on an enormous number of interlocking chemical reactions. These reactions make it possible for organisms to do work, such as moving around or catching prey, as well as growing, reproducing, and maintaining the structure of their bodies. Living things must use energy and consume nutrients to carry out the chemical reactions that sustain life. I'm going to repeat that again. Living things must use energy and consume nutrients to carry out the chemical reactions that sustain life. So here we see the fetus is inside the mother's womb, and the fetus does exhibit metabolism because they do consume energy. Whatever the mom eats, whatever the mother eats, that's what the fetus eats, right? Whatever nutrients the mom ingests goes straight to the fetus, right? And that's why the fetus is able to grow. I'm not going to even call it fetus, because when you call it fetus, it's like you separating the child from being human, most of you guys, right? But the baby is born inside, is getting all the nutrients from the mom to sustain life. It says the sum total of biochemical reactions occurring in an organism is called its metabolism. Metabolism can be subdivided into anabolism and catabolism. In anabolism, organisms make complex molecules from simpler ones, while catabolism, they do the reverse. Anabolic processes typically consume energy, whereas catabolic processes can make stored energy available. See? Now, homeostasis. Living organisms regulate their internal environment, right, to maintain the relatively narrow range of conditions needed for cell function. For instance, your body temperature needs to be kept relatively close to 98.6 Fahrenheit, 36 degrees Celsius. This maintenance of a stable internal environment, even in the face of a changing external environment, is known as homeostasis. So, they're trying to say that homeostasis is when your body maintains peace, internal peace within itself, right? Internal, that's what it means, homeostasis, right? It says your body regulates its own temperature, right? It cannot fluctuate up and down because that's not balance. That's not what homeostasis is. We have to maintain a relatively the same temperature to regulate our internal systems, right? So it doesn't matter what the external factors are. It could be 30 degrees outside. Our bodies will always maintain the same amount of temperature, and that's homeostasis, right? So, again, babies in the womb exhibit a specific temperature. They exhibit homeostasis. You see? They show this. They have the same temperature inside the womb regardless of what's going on externally. Right? Growth. Living organisms undergo regulated growth. Individual cells become larger in size, and multicellular organisms accumulate many cells through cell division. You yourself started out as a single cell. Humans started out as a single cell and now have tens of trillions of cells in your body. Growth depends on anabolic pathways that build large complex molecules such as protein and DNA, the genetic material. So this already smashes the whole abortion, the baby is not alive, right? Babies from the time the sperm touches the egg, they show growth. They're constantly growing, you see? And it's sad that we even had to argue with science. Some females and some people that are pro-choice will argue with science. But it's showing you right here all the definitions of life itself. The baby shows growth on a tremendous level. From the time you're in your mother's womb to the time you come out, you're still growing. Like, I don't understand how you can say the fetus is dead, but then it becomes alive after a certain trimester or whatever the case may be. That's asinine. That's really foolish. You know, if the sperm cell is alive and the ovary is alive, that would make the fetus alive from jump. You see, this is crazy. I really don't get it. You know, babies start growing, they start developing arms, legs, a brain, a heart, lungs. They start growing, you know, some even grow hair inside the mother's womb. You see? They grow their genitals are being more defined. They have fingers, they have toes, you know, they have all these different things. It's crazy. See? And it also says we start developing DNA, you see? The genetic materials. See? Reproduction. Living organisms can reproduce themselves to create new organisms. Reproduction can be either asexual, involving a single parent organism, or sexual, requiring two parents. See? Humans are sexual, right? We require two parents. We're not asexual beings. No, we're not. We need both mother and father in order to be born. Single cell organisms, like the dividing bacterium shown in the left panel of the image at right, can reproduce themselves simply by splitting in two. You see? So this is what we are, right? You see that cell? Sperm cell? You see the egg? This is what we are. In sexual reproduction, two parent organisms produce sperm and egg cells containing half of their genetic information. And these cells fuse to form a new individual with a full genetic set. Yo, it says the sperm cell and the eggs fuse together. So half of the genetic information comes from the father, the other half of the genetic information comes from the mother, and it fuses to create a full genetic set right here. It fused to form a new individual with a full genetic set. That new individual is the baby. This process called fertilization is illustrated in the image at far right. Look at this. Fusion. Fusion right here. All of us are fusions between our fathers and our mothers. Response. So that means reproduction. The baby is the proof of reproduction. You see, the baby is proof of that the father and mother has reproduced a genetic copy of themselves. Response. Living organism shows irritability, meaning that they respond to stimuli or changes in their environment. For instance, people pull their hands away fast from a flame. Many plants turn towards the sunlight. The unicellular organisms may migrate towards a source or nutrients or away from the noxious chemicals. This one is easy. Babies respond all the time. Babies show response all the time. When a baby is in the mother's womb, the mother could put music on her belly. The baby start moving around. It starts dancing. It starts kicking, right? That's a response right there. It starts kicking. It starts punching. And you can see the movement in the baby. You can see the actual response. You see, when the baby turns around, the mother feels it. So the baby is responding to whatever is going on. You see? Evolution. 7. Populations of living organisms can undergo evolution, meaning that the genetic makeup of a population may change over time. In some cases, evolution involves natural selection, in which a heritable trait, such as darker fur color or narrow beak shape, right, lets organisms survive and reproduce better in a particular environment. Over generations, a heritable trait that provides a fitness advantage may become more and more common in a population, making that population better suited to its environment. This process is called adaptation. So, from this, we've evolved and adapted based on our environments, right? The reason why I have darker skin is because my ancestors was adapted to heat and sunlight, right? We have to have darker skin in order to survive, the tropical weather of the Caribbean, around the equator, right? So this is a physical adaptation to my environment. You see, white people, they have a physical adaptation so they can survive better in the cold. They don't need melanin because melanin, or they don't need high levels of melanin because they're in cold regions, right? So white people are better adapted for the cold than I am, but I'm better adapted for the heat than white people. This is what it is. You see, everything that all of our genetic makeup is so we can survive in our environment, right? Now, it says, is this the definitive list? Living organisms have many different properties related to being alive, and it can be hard to decide on the exact set that best defines life. Thus, different thinkers have developed different lists of the properties of life. For instance, some lists might include movement as a defining characteristic, while others might specify that living things carry their genetic information in the form of DNA. Well, the baby inside the mother's womb, even if it's the fetus, it has DNA, right? And they show movement. Just the mere fact that they're growing arms, limbs, shows movement. Just the fact that they develop organs, that shows movement. When they get fully developed as a baby, they start moving and all of this different stuff. They start kicking. That's movement right there. Still, others might emphasize that life is carbon-based. Okay. Humans are carbon-based. So, it's also true that the list above is not foolproof. For instance, a mule, the offspring of a female horse and a male donkey, is unable to reproduce, right? However, most biologists, along with everyone else, would consider a mule, pictured above, to be alive. This right here. The mule is not able to reproduce, right? So, but scientists and many people would classify a mule alive. Just because it can't reproduce, that doesn't mean it's not alive. You see? Now, a similar point is illustrated in the amusing story a group of scientists had, after much debate, decided that ability to reproduce was the key property of life. To their disappointment, some pointed out that a lone rabbit did not meet this bar. Nonetheless, the list above provides a reasonable set of properties to help us distinguish life between things that are alive and those that are not. See? So now, this list right here, they said is not everything, but this is a general idea of what is considered alive, right? It says separated living and non-living things. How well do the properties above allow us to determine whether or not something is alive? Let's revisit the living and non-living things we saw in the introduction as a test. The living things we saw in the introduction, humans, dogs, and trees, easily fulfill the 7 criteria of life. I mean, it says it right there. The fetus is a human. The baby inside the mother's womb is human. So that would be classified as a living thing. You see? So the whole argument that, the fetus is not alive, the baby is not alive inside the mother's womb, that whole argument is smashed. That whole argument is destroyed based on biology, based on science. What is considered alive? You see? That just right there is destroyed completely. All right?